My name is Alexandra Chen, and at 29 years old, I never imagined I'd be spending Christmas Eve alone in my Seattle apartment, staring at a pile of wrapped presents that would never be opened by the people I'd bought them for. 3 days earlier, my brother Michael had sent me a text that still made my stomach turn. "Don't come home for Christmas. You're not welcome anymore." The message came with a photo of our family Christmas card. Mom, Dad, Michael, and my sister Sarah, all smiling in matching red sweaters. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even mentioned in the family newsletter that went out to relatives. It was as if I'd been erased from the Chen family entirely. But what they didn't know was that I'd already shipped their Christmas gifts. Gifts that contained more truth than any of them were prepared for. Gifts that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, I was what you might call the family disappointment, wrapped in good intentions. The Chen household revolved around achievement, and somehow I always seemed to be achieving the wrong things. My parents, both immigrants from Taiwan who'd built a successful accounting firm from nothing, had very specific ideas about what success looked like. It involved numbers, stability, and following a predetermined path that led to financial security and social respectability. Why, older brother Michael fit that mold perfectly. He was the golden child who never seemed to struggle with anything. Straight A's came naturally to him. He was captain of the debate team, and he sailed through his MBA program at Stanford before joining Dad's firm as a partner. Michael was methodical, logical, and exactly what my parents had dreamed of when they sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities they'd never had. My younger sister Sarah was the family's artistic soul, but even her creativity came with achievements my parents could understand. She won state competitions for her paintings, earned a scholarship to art school, and now ran a successful graphic design business that specialized in corporate branding. She'd managed to take her artistic talents and turn them into something commercially viable, something that made sense in our family's framework of success. Narayan Awanarano. Then there was me, the middle child who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of almost but not quite. I was smart enough to get good grades, but not valedictorian material like Michael. I was creative enough to appreciate art, but not gifted enough to win competitions like Sarah. I was responsible enough to help around the house, but not organized enough to take over family business operations like my siblings eventually would. What I did have was an inexplicable fascination with other people's stories. While Michael was studying market trends and Sarah was perfecting her color theory, I was reading biographies, watching documentaries, and spending hours talking to elderly neighbors about their lives. I collected stories the way some people collect stamps, not because they were valuable to anyone else, but because they felt precious to me. In high school, I joined the school newspaper, thinking maybe journalism would be my calling. I wrote feature stories about retiring teachers, immigrant families in our community, and local veterans. My articles were well received, but when I mentioned possibly majoring in journalism, my parents' reaction was swift and decisive. "Journalism is not a stable career," my mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone of finality that meant the discussion was over. "You need something with job security, with benefits, something you can build a life on." My father nodded in agreement. "Look at what happened to newspapers. Everything is online now. There's no money in it. You're smart, Alexandra. You could do accounting, maybe law school. Something practical." Michael, ever the supportive older brother, tried to soften their words. "Maybe you could write as a hobby," he suggested. "But you need a real career first, something that will take care of you." Even Sarah, who I'd thought might understand the pull of creative work, seemed to agree. "You could always freelance on the side," she said, "but you need something steady as your main job." So I majored in business administration at Oregon State University, telling myself that I could always find ways to incorporate storytelling into whatever career I chose. Maybe I'd work in marketing, crafting narratives for brands. Maybe I'd go into human resources, helping to shape company culture through communication. There had to be a way to bridge the gap between what I loved and what was practical. College was where I first started to understand that I saw the world differently than my family did. While my classmates were focused on networking and internships that would lead to corporate positions, I found myself drawn to the stories behind the business case studies we examined. Who were the people affected by these corporate decisions? What happened to the employees when companies merged or downsized? How did these abstract business strategies play out in real human lives? I started a blog during my junior year called The Human Side of Business. It was nothing fancy, just a WordPress site where I wrote about the people behind the corporate headlines. I interviewed small business owners about their challenges, wrote profiles of workers in industries that were being disrupted by technology, and explored how economic policies affected real families. The blog slowly gained a following, and I began to feel like I'd found my voice. My family knew about the blog, but they didn't really understand it. "It's nice that you have a hobby," my mother would say when I mentioned a particularly meaningful interview I'd conducted. "But don't let it distract you from your studies." The disconnect became more apparent during family gatherings. While Michael would regale everyone with stories about major clients he'd landed for the firm, and Sarah would show off her latest design projects, I'd try to share something I'd learned from my interviews or a story I was working on. The polite smiles and quick subject changes made it clear that my passion project wasn't considered worthy of the same attention as their more traditional achievements. After graduation, I took a job at a mid-size marketing firm in Portland, thinking it would be a good compromise between stability and creativity. The work was fine, writing copy for product launches, developing social media strategies, managing client relationships, but it felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. I was competent at my job, even successful by most measures, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a role rather than being myself. The blog continued to grow during this time. I was posting twice a week, and my readership had expanded beyond Oregon to include people from across the country who were interested in human-centered business stories. I started receiving emails from readers who said my articles had helped them understand their own work situations better, or had given them courage to make difficult career decisions. One evening, about 2 years after starting my marketing job, I received an email that changed everything. It was from a woman named Patricia Martinez, who ran a nonprofit organization in Seattle called Voices Unheard. The organization worked to amplify the stories of underrepresented communities, and she'd been following my blog for several months. "I've been reading your work," she wrote, "and I'm impressed by your ability to find the human story in complex situations. We have a position opening for a community storyteller, someone who would work directly with people in our programs to help them share their experiences in ways that could influence policy and create change. The salary isn't huge, but the work is meaningful. Would you be interested in hearing more?" I stared at that email for a long time. Here was someone offering me a job that seemed tailor-made for my interests and skills, but it would mean leaving the stable marketing position my family had been so relieved to see me land. It would mean moving to Seattle, away from the family support system that had always been such a central part of my identity. And it would mean fully committing to a career path that my parents had always viewed as impractical and financially risky. I printed out the email and carried it with me for 3 days before I finally called Patricia back. The conversation confirmed what I'd hoped. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling. The organization worked with immigrant families, formerly incarcerated individuals, people experiencing homelessness, and others whose stories were rarely heard in mainstream media or policy discussions. My role would be to help them craft their narratives in ways that could be shared with lawmakers, community leaders, and the general public. "We believe that policy changes when people can connect with individual stories," Patricia explained. "Statistics are important, but stories create empathy. Stories create change." I accepted the position that same day, then spent the next week figuring out how to tell my family. The conversation took place on a Sunday evening at my parents' house, after our usual family dinner. Michael and Sarah were both there, along with their respective partners. I'd waited until after we'd cleaned up the dishes and settled into the living room with tea, hoping the relaxed atmosphere would make the news easier to deliver. "I have something to tell everyone," I began, my heart racing in a way that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "I've been offered a new job, and I've decided to take it." My mother looked up from her tea, immediately interested. "Oh, what kind of promotion is it? Are you moving to the senior marketing team?" "Actually, it's not at the same company. It's a nonprofit organization in Seattle called Voices Unheard. I'd be working as a community storyteller, helping people share their experiences to influence policy and create social change." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my family processing this information, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern, to something that looked like disappointment. My father was the first to speak. A nonprofit? Alexandra, you know how difficult it is to build financial security working for nonprofits. The pay is always low, the benefits are minimal, and there's no job security. The work is meaningful, Dad. I'd be helping people whose voices aren't usually heard, and meaningful doesn't pay the bills, my mother interrupted. You have a good job now, with opportunities for advancement. Why would you throw that away for something so uncertain? Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. Alex, I understand wanting to help people, but you need to think about this practically. What's your 5-year plan? What's your retirement strategy? These are things you need to consider. Sarah, who I'd hoped might be more understanding given her own creative career, surprised me with her response. It seems like you're running away from something, she said quietly. Are you unhappy in Portland? Are you unhappy with us? The question caught me off guard. This isn't about being unhappy with family, I said. It's about following my passion, about doing work that feels meaningful to me. But you barely make enough to support yourself now, my mother said. How are you going to manage in Seattle, which is even more expensive? And what about buying a house someday? What about having a family? These nonprofit jobs don't provide the stability you need for those things. I tried to explain that the salary, while modest, was actually a slight increase from my marketing job, and that the benefits package was quite good. I talked about the organization's mission, the impact they were having, and how my skills and interests seemed perfectly aligned with the work they were doing. But I could see from their faces that my words weren't landing the way I'd hoped. I think you're making a mistake, my father said finally. But you're an adult, and you have to make your own decisions. Just promise me you'll think about it for another week before you give notice at your current job. I had already given notice, but I didn't have the heart to tell them that. Instead, I nodded and said I'd consider their concerns, hoping that once I was actually doing the work and could show them the impact it was having, they'd understand my decision better. The move to Seattle happened 6 weeks later. My family helped me pack, but the atmosphere was subdued. There were no celebrations, no excitement about my new adventure. Instead, there was a sense of resignation, as if they were watching me make a choice they couldn't support, but couldn't stop. Call us when you get there, my mother said as I loaded the last box into my car. And remember, if this doesn't work out, you can always come home. The implication was clear. They expected this to be a temporary detour, a phase one needed to work through, before returning to a more sensible career path. They loved me, but they didn't understand me, and that gap between love and understanding was about to become a chasm that would take years to bridge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Northwestern University was everything I'd dreamed it would be, and nothing I'd expected. The campus in fall was a riot of colors I'd never seen in the Arizona desert. Deep crimsons and golden yellows that seemed to glow against the gray Lake Michigan sky. My dorm room in Willard Hall was smaller than my childhood bedroom, but it felt like a palace because it was entirely mine. My roommate was a girl named Alexandra Chen from San Francisco, a pre-med student who kept her side of the room organized with military precision. She was the first person I'd met who didn't find my academic ambitions threatening or unusual. When I told her I wanted to be an investigative journalist, she simply nodded and said, "That's cool. You'll be good at it. You ask a lot of questions." The journalism program at Northwestern was notorious for its intensity. Professor Margaret Dalton, a former war correspondent who'd covered conflicts in 3 different continents, had a reputation for breaking down students in the first semester. During our first class, she looked around the lecture hall and said, "Half of you think you want to be journalists. 1/4 of you actually have the talent. Maybe 3 of you have what it takes to make it in this industry." I was determined to be one of those 3. The workload was crushing. While other freshmen were discovering the social aspects of college life, I was spending 18-hour days in the library, researching stories, conducting interviews, and learning to write under impossible deadlines. My fingers were permanently stained with ink from the old typewriters in the journalism lab, and I lived on coffee and determination. My first major assignment was to write a feature story about something that mattered to me personally. While my classmates wrote about campus traditions or local businesses, I chose to investigate the construction industry's treatment of immigrant workers. Drawing on my father's business connections and my own bilingual abilities, I spent weeks interviewing workers who shared stories of wage theft, unsafe working conditions, and employer intimidation. The story I wrote was hard-hitting and meticulously researched. It exposed a network of contractors who were exploiting undocumented workers, including several companies that had worked as subcontractors for Martinez Construction. When Professor Dalton read it aloud in class as an example of excellent investigative reporting, I felt a surge of pride followed immediately by a stab of guilt. I had used my family's connections to expose practices that indirectly implicated my father's business. While Martinez Construction wasn't directly involved in the exploitation, they had unknowingly hired subcontractors who were. The story was journalistically sound and ethically important, but it felt like a betrayal of the man who'd worked so hard to build something meaningful. That night, I called home for the first time in 3 weeks. Mom answered, her voice bright with the forced cheerfulness that meant she was trying to hide something. "Rebecca, how wonderful to hear from you. We were just talking about you at dinner." "What were you saying?" A pause. "Oh, just wondering how you're doing. Are you eating enough? Making friends?" It was the kind of conversation we'd been having since I left, surface-level exchanges that carefully avoided any real emotional depth. I wanted to tell her about my story, about the recognition I'd received, about how Professor Dalton had said I showed real promise. But I also knew that sharing my success would mean explaining how I'd achieved it, and that conversation would lead to questions I wasn't ready to answer. "I'm doing well, Mom. Really well. The program is challenging, but I'm learning so much." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your father wants to talk to you." Dad's voice came on the line, gruff and tired. "Rebecca, how are the grades?" "Good, Dad. Really good. I'm at the top of my class in several subjects." "That's fine. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Are you planning to come home for Thanksgiving?" The question hung in the air between us. Thanksgiving was still 6 weeks away, but I could hear the expectation in his voice. This wasn't really a question. It was a test. "I'm not sure yet," I said carefully. "I have a big project due the Monday after Thanksgiving, and I'm not sure I can afford the plane ticket right now." Another pause. "We'll send you the money for the ticket. This is important, Rebecca. Family traditions matter." "I know they do, Dad. You just what? You're too important now for your family?" The hurt in his voice was unmistakable, and it cut through me like a blade. "That's not fair, Dad. It's not about being too important. It's about trying to succeed in a really competitive program. Success doesn't mean anything if you forget where you came from." After we hung up, I sat in my dorm room staring out at Lake Michigan, feeling the weight of competing loyalties. Every achievement at Northwestern felt like a step away from my family, every recognition like evidence that I was becoming someone they didn't recognize. I did go home for Thanksgiving, using money Dad had wired to my account. The flight from Chicago to Phoenix felt like traveling backward through time, from the sophisticated urban landscape I was learning to navigate to the familiar suburban sprawl of my childhood. The house looked exactly the same, but I felt different walking through the front door. The rooms seemed smaller, the decorations more garish, the conversations more provincial. It was the first time I'd experienced the disorientation of outgrowing a place that had once defined you completely. Michael was there with his new girlfriend, Amanda Richards, a pretty blonde who worked as a dental hygienist and seemed perfectly content with her life's trajectory. She asked polite questions about Northwestern, but I could see her eyes glaze over when I tried to explain my coursework. Isabella had brought her latest boyfriend, a struggling musician named David, who wore his artistic suffering like a badge of honor. The dinner conversation was stilted, filled with the kind of careful small talk that happens when people are avoiding larger issues. Dad asked about my classes, but in a way that suggested he was fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing genuine interest. Mom kept pushing food on me, commenting that I looked thin, that I probably wasn't eating properly. "So what exactly do you plan to do with this journalism degree?" Michael asked as we were clearing the table. "I mean, newspapers are dying, right? Everything's online now." "There are lots of opportunities in digital media," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Investigative reporting is more important than ever." "But is it stable?" Amanda chimed in. "I mean, it seems like such an uncertain field. At least with dental hygiene, you know there will always be jobs." Isabella shot her a sharp look. Not everyone needs to choose their career based on job security. Some people are willing to take risks for something they're passionate about. I'm not criticizing, Amanda said quickly. I'm just saying it's practical to think about the future. Rebecca's always been impractical, Dad said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Head in the clouds, thinking she's going to change the world. The comment stung more than it should have. I excused myself to help Mom with the dishes, hoping to escape the tension building in the dining room. Don't mind your father, Mom said quietly as we worked side by side at the sink. He's proud of you, he just doesn't understand what you're doing. Are you proud of me, Mom? She looked at me with surprise. Of course I am. You're my daughter. That's not what I mean. Are you proud of what I'm accomplishing? My grades? My writing? The recognition I'm getting? Mom dried her hands slowly, considering her words. I'm proud that you're working hard. I just hope you're not sacrificing too much for it. Like what? Like family. Like the possibility of a normal life. Like finding someone to share your life with. It was the first time she'd directly expressed her concerns about my choices, and the honesty was both refreshing and painful. I could see that from her perspective, my dedication to journalism looked like a rejection of everything she valued: family, tradition, the kind of domestic happiness she'd built her life around. That Thanksgiving weekend, I felt like an anthropologist studying a culture I'd once belonged to but no longer fully understood. Every conversation revealed new gaps between my evolving worldview and the static expectations of my family. They wanted me to be the same Rebecca who'd left for college, just with a degree that would somehow make me more valuable in their established framework. But I was becoming someone different. Northwestern was teaching me to question assumptions, to dig deeper than surface explanations, to value truth over comfort. These weren't just academic skills. They were changing my fundamental approach to life. I was learning to see the world as a complex system of interconnected stories, rather than a series of predetermined paths. The return flight to Chicago after Thanksgiving felt like emerging from underwater. As the plane lifted off from Sky Harbor Airport, I watched the Phoenix sprawl shrink below me and felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I was returning to a place where I felt more like myself, but I was also leaving behind people who'd shaped me, who loved me in ways they knew how to express. Back at Northwestern, I threw myself into my work with renewed intensity. The journalism program was structured like a pyramid. Each semester eliminated more students who couldn't keep up with the demands. I was determined not just to survive, but to excel. My investigative reporting class became my obsession. Professor Dalton assigned us to work on a semester-long project that would culminate in a publishable piece. I chose to investigate how student debt was affecting career choices among college graduates, spending countless hours conducting interviews and analyzing data. The story I produced was comprehensive and compelling, revealing how crushing debt loads were forcing talented students to abandon public service careers in favor of higher-paying but less fulfilling work. When Professor Dalton announced that she was recommending my story for publication in a national magazine, I felt a surge of vindication. The piece was published in my sophomore year, my first professional byline. When I called home to share the news, the response was muted. Mom said congratulations, but her tone suggested she was reading from a script. Dad asked if I was getting paid for it, and when I told him it was a small amount, he made a comment about how writing didn't seem like a sustainable career path. It was Michael's reaction that hurt most. When I sent him a link to the article, he didn't respond for 3 days. When he finally called, his first comment was, "This is pretty critical of people who choose practical careers over idealistic ones." "It's not critical," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "It's just examining the factors that influence career decisions." "Come on, Rebecca. You basically argue that people who choose stability over passion are selling out. That's not what I'm saying at all, isn't it? I mean, I chose to join Dad's business instead of pursuing some dream career. According to your article, that makes me part of the problem." The conversation revealed a chasm I hadn't fully understood. My family was reading my work not as journalism but as personal commentary on their choices. Every story I wrote that questioned conventional wisdom felt like an attack on their conventional lives. By my junior year, the calls home had become monthly obligations rather than genuine connections. When I did share my achievements, Dean's List, journalism awards, internship offers, they were met with polite congratulations that felt more like condolences. Christmas of my junior year was the beginning of the end. I came home carrying a portfolio of my published work, hoping to finally help my family understand what I was accomplishing. Instead, the visit became a series of subtle criticisms and pointed questions about my future plans. "When are you going to settle down?" became Mom's favorite refrain. "All this career focus is fine, but you need to think about having a family." "I'm 21, Mom. I have time." "I was married at 22, she reminded me. "I had Michael when I was 23. Things are different now. Are they better?" It was a question that hung between us like a challenge. From her perspective, my education and career ambitions were taking me further from the things that had brought her happiness. From my perspective, her life looked like a beautiful prison, fulfilling but limited. Dad's criticism was more direct. "You're becoming someone we don't recognize," he said during one particularly tense dinner conversation. "This college has filled your head with ideas that make you think you're better than where you came from." "I don't think I'm better than anyone. Don't you? You write articles criticizing people who make practical choices. You act like family traditions are beneath you. You talk about your professors like they're more important than your parents." The accusation stung because it contained elements of truth I wasn't ready to examine. Had I become condescending? Was I using my education as a weapon against my family's values? That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I would prove that I could be successful without abandoning my family, that I could build a career that honored both my ambitions and my roots. It was a noble goal, but it would prove more complicated than I imagined. The path I was choosing would lead to years of careful balancing acts, constant code switching between my professional identity and my family role. And eventually, it would lead to a Christmas Eve confrontation that would force all of us to confront the impossible expectations we'd placed on each other. But first, I had to graduate, find a job, and discover whether the person I was becoming could coexist with the family I'd never stopped loving. Graduation from Northwestern came with 3 job offers and a difficult decision that would define the next chapter of my life. The Chicago Tribune wanted me for their Metro desk, covering local politics and corruption, exactly the kind of muckraking journalism I'd trained for. The Washington Post offered a position in their investigative unit, a dream job that would put me at the center of national political coverage. But it was the third offer that ultimately won my heart. Senior staff writer at the Denver Chronicle, a mid-sized daily that was making waves with its innovative digital approach to journalism. Denver wasn't New York or Washington, but it represented something that felt right for where I was in my life. The city sat at the intersection of urban sophistication and Western independence, progressive enough to value investigative journalism but grounded enough to remember its roots. Most importantly, it was far enough from Phoenix to give me breathing room but close enough that I couldn't be accused of fleeing to the opposite coast. The decision to take the Denver job was met with mixed reactions from my family. During a graduation phone call, Dad's first question was typical. "Why Denver? What's there that Chicago or Washington can't give you?" "It's a great opportunity, Dad. The Chronicle is doing innovative work in digital journalism, and they're giving me a chance to develop my own investigative beat." Investigative beat. He repeated the phrase like it was in a foreign language. What does that even mean? It means I get to choose important stories and spend months researching them. Stories that can actually make a difference. Make a difference in what? The question revealed the fundamental disconnect between us. To him, work was about building something tangible, creating jobs, providing for family. To me, journalism was about uncovering truth, holding power accountable, giving voice to the voiceless. We were speaking different languages about what constituted meaningful labor. Halfer. Mom's reaction was more emotional. "Denver is so far from home," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "First Chicago, now Denver. You just keep moving further away." "It's only a 2-hour flight from Phoenix, Mom. That's closer than Chicago was." "It's not about the distance on a map, Rebecca. It's about the distance here," she said, and I imagined her touching her heart. Every time you move, you take a piece of us with you, but you leave more of yourself behind." The poetry of her response surprised me. Mom had always been practical, focused on the concrete details of daily life, but she'd articulated something I'd been feeling but couldn't name, that every step forward in my career felt like a step away from the people who'd shaped me. Isabella was the only one who seemed genuinely excited about my move. "Denver is amazing," she said during a rare private conversation while I was packing up my northwestern apartment. "The art scene there is incredible, and the mountains are right there. You're gonna love it." "You could visit," I suggested hopefully. "Maybe we could take a ski trip or something." "I'd love that," she said, and for a moment I glimpsed the sister relationship I'd always wanted. "Don't let them make you feel guilty about this, Rebecca. You're living your life, not theirs." Michael's reaction was the most complicated. During my graduation ceremony, he'd been genuinely proud, applauding loudly when my name was called, and even tearing up during the speech I gave as one of the journalism program's top graduates. But when I announced the Denver job, his demeanor shifted. "So you're really not coming home," he said. "It wasn't a question. This is my career, Michael. I have to go where the opportunities are. There are newspapers in Phoenix, local news stations. You could work here and still do your investigative thing. It's not the same kind of work. The Chronicle is giving me a chance to cover stories that matter on a national level. And we don't matter on a national level?" The hurt in his voice was unmistakable. I realized that to my family, my career choices weren't just about professional advancement. They were about choosing priorities, about deciding what deserved my time and energy. Every job I took outside of Arizona felt like a vote against the importance of home. Moving to Denver in August 2018 felt like stepping into a new version of myself. The city was experiencing a renaissance, with young professionals flocking to its combination of economic opportunity and outdoor lifestyle. I found a one-bedroom apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, walking distance from the Chronicle offices and surrounded by coffee shops, bookstores, and the kind of diverse community I'd craved since leaving Northwestern. The Chronicle building was a converted warehouse in the River North Arts District, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that made it feel more like a tech startup than a traditional newspaper. Editor-in-chief Patricia Morgan was a veteran journalist who'd worked at major papers before moving to Denver, specifically to experiment with new forms of storytelling. "Traditional journalism is dying," she told me during my first week. "But that doesn't mean the need for good reporting is disappearing. It means we need to find new ways to tell important stories, new ways to reach readers, new ways to make journalism sustainable." My first major assignment was to investigate the affordable housing crisis in Denver, a story that would take me into the city's rapidly changing neighborhoods and introduce me to the human cost of economic growth. I spent weeks interviewing families being displaced by gentrification, landlords gaming the system, and city officials struggling to balance development with livability. The story I produced was published as a 5-part series that combined traditional reporting with interactive data visualization and video interviews. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The series was shared thousands of times on social media, sparked city council debates, and led to actual policy changes in how Denver approached affordable housing development. For the first time in my career, I felt the true power of journalism, not just to inform, but to create change. The recognition was intoxicating. The series won a regional journalism award, and I was invited to speak at journalism conferences about innovative storytelling techniques. When I called home to share the news about the award, the response was polite, but distant. Mom said congratulations, Dad asked if the award came with any money, and Michael made a comment about how complicated the housing crisis must be for someone who'd never owned property. "I've done months of research," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "I've interviewed dozens of people, analyzed city data, consulted with economists and urban planners." "I'm sure you have," he said. "I just think there's a difference between understanding something from the outside and living it." It was a subtle but pointed criticism. In Michael's view, my journalism was academic, removed from real-world experience. He had a point. I was writing about housing policy while living in a rented apartment, analyzing economic displacement, while my own mobility was a privilege most people didn't have. But that criticism also revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what journalism could be. I wasn't claiming to live every story I covered. I was claiming to research them thoroughly, to listen to people who were living them, to synthesize complex information into accessible narratives that could inform public discourse. The success of the housing series led to more ambitious assignments. I investigated corruption in the state's prison system, exposing how private companies were profiting from inadequate health care for inmates. I covered the environmental impact of Colorado's oil and gas industry, revealing how regulatory capture was putting communities at risk. I wrote about the opioid crisis, about education funding, about the intersection of technology and privacy rights. Each story required months of work, building relationships with sources, filing public records requests, analyzing data, and crafting narratives that could make complex issues understandable to general readers. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. I was becoming the journalist I'd dreamed of being at Northwestern, someone who could use reporting to make a difference. My personal life in Denver was smaller but richer than it had been in college. I developed a close friendship with Marcus Thompson, a photographer who worked on many of my stories. Marcus was a Denver native who'd returned home after working in New York, and he understood the complicated relationship between career ambition and geographic loyalty. "You can't live your life for other people," he told me one evening as we were reviewing photos from a story about veteran homelessness. "Even family. Especially family, sometimes." "But they're not wrong," I said. "I am choosing my career over spending time with them." "You're choosing to live your life instead of theirs," he corrected. "That's not the same thing." I also began dating someone for the first time since college. David Kim was an environmental lawyer who worked for a nonprofit focused on climate change litigation. He was smart, funny, and understood the demands of meaningful work. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared values and mutual respect, rather than the intense drama that had characterized my college relationships. When I mentioned David to my family during one of our increasingly infrequent phone calls, Mom's first question was, "Is he someone you could see yourself marrying?" "We've been dating for 3 months, Mom. It's a little early for that conversation." "When I was your age, I knew your father was the one after 2 weeks," she said. "Sometimes you just know." "Maybe, but I'm not ready to make that kind of decision yet." "Rebecca, you're 26. You can't wait forever." The pressure to settle down, to find someone and start a family, was becoming a constant undercurrent in our conversations. From my family's perspective, my career success was fine, as long as it didn't interfere with the more important business of marriage and children. From my perspective, I was finally building the life I'd always wanted, and I wasn't ready to compromise it for someone else's timeline. The Christmas of 2019 was a turning point. I'd been in Denver for a year and a half, and I'd established myself as one of the Chronicle's most valuable reporters. I'd won awards, built a reputation, and was being courted by larger newspapers. But I'd also missed Michael's wedding because of a story deadline, skipped Isabella's art gallery opening because of a court hearing, and shortened my Thanksgiving visit home because of a breaking news story. When I called to confirm my Christmas plans, the conversation with Mom was tense from the start. "I hope you're planning to stay for more than 2 days this time," she said. "I'm taking a week off," I assured her. "Christmas Eve through New Year's Day. I'll be there for all the important stuff." "Will you really? Or will some important story come up that you have to rush back for?" The accusation stung. Because it was partially fair. I had cut short family visits for work emergencies. In my defense, journalism was a deadline-driven profession where breaking news didn't wait for convenient timing. But from my family's perspective, I was repeatedly choosing work over them. "I promise I'll be there, Mom. No work calls, no emergency trips back to Denver." "Good. Because your father and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you." "Concerned about what?" "About this life you're building. You're 26, Rebecca. You're successful, which is wonderful, but you're alone. You work constantly. You live in a city where you don't have any real connections, and you're missing all the important family moments." "I have connections here, Mom. I have friends. I have David. David, who you've been dating for less than a year and can't even say you love." "I don't know if I love him yet." "That's honest, not pathological." "It's the problem, Rebecca. You analyze everything instead of feeling it. You treat your own life like one of your stories, keeping emotional distance so you can maintain objective perspective." The conversation ended awkwardly, with both of us feeling misunderstood. But Mom's words haunted me because they contained a grain of truth I wasn't comfortable examining. Had I become so focused on professional success that I'd forgotten how to be present in my personal life? As I prepared for Christmas 2019, I made a resolution. I would use this visit to really connect with my family, to show them that career success and family loyalty weren't mutually exclusive. I would prove that I could be both the journalist I'd become and the daughter, sister, and family member they needed me to be. It was a noble goal, but it would prove more complicated than I imagined. The family dynamics I'd been avoiding through geographic distance were still there, waiting to be confronted. And the person I'd become in Denver, confident, independent, professionally successful, would clash with the family role I'd never officially resigned from. The Christmas that was supposed to heal our relationships would instead expose how far apart we'd grown, setting the stage for a confrontation that would force all of us to decide what family really meant in the face of diverging dreams and competing loyalties. Christmas 2019 began with the best intentions and ended with words that couldn't be taken back. I flew into Phoenix Sky Harbor on December 23rd, carrying carefully wrapped gifts and a genuine determination to repair the growing rifts in my family. What I didn't anticipate was walking into a situation that had been building for months without my knowledge. Nakumamoti havuridhai. The first sign something was wrong came at baggage claim. Usually, someone from my family would pick me up at the airport, a small tradition that made coming home feel special. Instead, I found myself calling an Uber, standing outside the terminal in the desert heat, while other travelers were greeted by excited relatives. When I called Mom from the car, her explanation was casual but telling. "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetheart. Michael had to work late at the site, and your father is dealing with a supplier issue. Isabella is at the gallery preparing for her year-end show. We're all just so busy right now." "It's fine, Mom. I'll be there soon." But it wasn't fine. In the past, my arrival home had been treated as an event worth rearranging schedules for. This time, it felt like I was fitting into whatever time was left after more important priorities were handled. The house looked beautiful, as it always did during Christmas. Mom had outdone herself with the decorations, a 12-foot tree in the living room, garlands wrapped around every banister, and her famous gingerbread village displayed on the dining room table. The familiar scents of cinnamon and pine should have felt comforting, but instead they highlighted how much of a visitor I'd become in my own childhood home. Mom greeted me with a warm hug, but there was something performative about it, as if she were playing the role of the welcoming mother rather than actually being glad to see me. Dad was in his study, on a work call that seemed to stretch on indefinitely. When he finally emerged, his hug was brief and distracted. "How was the flight?" he asked, but his phone was already buzzing with messages. "Fine. Long day, but I'm glad to be home." "Good. Good. Listen, I have to handle this supplier situation, but we'll catch up at dinner." It was only 4 p.m., but I already felt like I was intruding on their regular routines rather than being welcomed into them. I carried my suitcase upstairs to my childhood bedroom, which had been converted into a guest room several years earlier. The debate team pennants were gone, replaced by neutral artwork. My old bookshelf now held Mom's romance novels and Dad's business magazines. Isabella arrived home around 6 p.m., looking stunning and stressed. Her gallery was hosting a major exhibition that would open the day after Christmas, and she was juggling last-minute preparations with family obligations. "Rebecca," she said, embracing me with genuine warmth. "I'm so glad you're here. I've missed you." "I've missed you too. How's the exhibition going?" "Crazy, but good. It's my biggest show yet. I have 3 pieces that might sell to serious collectors, which would be huge for my career." "That's amazing, Isabella. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks. I wish I could spend more time with you this week. But the opening is going to consume everything until it's over." Even Isabella, who'd always been my closest family ally, was pulled in other directions. I understood that life didn't stop for my visits, but the cumulative effect was making me feel like an afterthought in my own family's lives. Michael arrived for dinner with Amanda, who was now his fiancée, and the dynamic shift was immediately apparent. Amanda had inserted herself into the family ecosystem with remarkable efficiency. She helped Mom set the table, knew exactly how Dad liked his coffee, and had inside jokes with Isabella about reality TV shows they watched together. "Rebecca," Amanda said, hugging me like we were old friends. "It's so good to see you again. I've been following your articles online. That prison story was intense." "Thank you. I'm glad you read it. I shared it with everyone at the dental office. We were all talking about how scary it is that those things happen." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, but there was something about the way she positioned herself as the family member who stayed connected to my work that felt territorial. She was claiming a role I'd abdicated through distance and absence. Dinner conversation was pleasant but strained. Dad talked about expansion plans for the construction company. Mom discussed the neighborhood association's latest initiatives. Isabella described her upcoming exhibition. Michael and Amanda shared updates about their wedding planning, which had apparently accelerated since I'd last spoken with them. "We've moved the date up to February," Michael announced. "Amanda found this perfect venue that had a cancellation, so we're going to have a winter wedding." "That's wonderful," I said, trying to hide my surprise. "February is soon, though. Do you need help with anything?" "Actually," Amanda said, glancing at Michael, "we've got most of it handled. My family is doing a lot of the planning, and Isabella is helping with the artistic elements. What about a bachelorette party? I could organize something." "That's sweet of you to offer," Amanda interrupted gently, "but my sister is handling all of that. She's got a whole weekend planned in Scottsdale with my college friends." The message was clear. My absence had created a vacuum that others had filled. I was no longer essential to the family's operations, celebrations, or support systems. I'd become a guest in my own family's life. After dinner, I offered to help with dishes, but Mom waved me away. "You're our guest, sweetheart. Relax." Guest. The word stung more than it should have. I'd become a guest in the home where I'd learned to walk, where I'd done homework at the kitchen table, where I'd shared thousands of meals with these people. That night, lying in the guest room that had once been my sanctuary, I tried to process the subtle but unmistakable shift in my family's dynamics. I had always assumed that my physical absence wouldn't change my essential role in their lives. But families, I was learning, were ecosystems that adapted to missing members. The space I'd left had been filled by other people, other priorities, other relationships. Christmas Eve morning brought the first open conflict. I'd planned to make my famous pancakes for breakfast, a tradition from my teenage years that had always been a highlight of Christmas morning. But when I came downstairs, Amanda was already in the kitchen, preparing what she called her special Christmas morning strata. "Oh," I said, stopping in the doorway, "I was going to make pancakes." "Pancakes?" Mom looked confused. "But Amanda always makes her strata on Christmas Eve morning. It's become our tradition. Always." The word implied a history that didn't include me. How many Christmas mornings had I missed while this new tradition was being established? "I didn't know," I said quietly. "I'll just have some coffee." "Don't be silly," Amanda said brightly. "There's plenty of strata for everyone. I made extra because I knew you'd be here." She was being kind, but kindness from someone who'd replaced me in my own family's traditions felt like salt in a wound. I sat at the kitchen table, watching Amanda move through the space with the confidence of someone who belonged, while I felt like an intruder in my own childhood home. The gift exchange that evening was when everything fell apart. We'd always opened presents on Christmas Eve, a tradition that allowed Christmas Day to be more relaxed. I'd spent weeks selecting gifts that would show my family how much I understood and valued them. For Dad, I'd found a rare book about Southwestern architecture that I'd discovered in a Denver antiquarian bookstore. For Mom, I'd commissioned a custom piece of jewelry from a local artist, incorporating stones that matched her birthstone and those of her children. For Isabella, I'd bought professional-grade art supplies that I'd researched extensively. For Michael, I'd gotten tickets to a spring training game featuring his favorite team, planning to fly back to Arizona to attend with him. But when it came time to exchange gifts, the careful balance I'd tried to maintain was destroyed by what I didn't receive. My family's gifts to me were generic and poorly considered. Dad gave me a gift card to a department store chain that didn't even have locations in Denver. Mom's gift was a cookbook titled Cooking for One, which felt like a passive-aggressive comment on my single status. Isabella gave me a scented candle that smelled like artificial vanilla. Michael's gift was a subscription to a magazine about Arizona hiking trails. The message was clear. They saw me as someone who was temporarily away rather than someone who had built a life elsewhere. Their gifts reflected their fantasy of who I should be rather than who I actually was. But the moment that broke everything was when I noticed the family photo on the mantel. It had been updated since my last visit, showing Mom, Dad, Michael, Amanda, and Isabella gathered around last year's Christmas tree. I wasn't in the photo despite having been home for Christmas 2018. "When was this taken?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, that's from last year," Mom said casually. "You left early to go back to Denver, remember? We took it after you were gone. You replaced the family photo with one that doesn't include me?" "We didn't replace it," Dad said defensively. "We just updated it with a more recent one. A more recent one that excludes one of your children." "Rebecca," Michael said, his voice carrying a warning tone, "don't make this into something it's not." "What is it then?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've decided I'm not really part of this family anymore." The room fell silent. Amanda looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Isabella stared at her hands. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "You're always part of this family." "Am I? Because I feel like I'm being tolerated rather than welcomed. Like I'm a guest you're obligated to include, rather than a daughter you're happy to see." "Maybe that's because you act like a guest," Dad said, his voice hard. "You show up once or twice a year, stay for a few days, and then disappear back to your important life in Denver. You miss weddings, you skip family events, you can't even be bothered to call regularly. I call every week. You call every month, if we're lucky. And when you do call, you sound distracted, like you're checking it off a list." The accusation stung because it contained truth. I had been distracted during recent calls, multitasking while talking to my family, treating our conversations like obligations rather than connections. "I'm building a career," I said defensively. "I'm trying to make a difference with my work." "And we're proud of you," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We just wish you could make a difference without disappearing from our lives." "I haven't disappeared. I'm here right now." "Are you?" Michael asked. "Because even when you're physically here, you're not really present. You're thinking about your next story, your next deadline, your next career move. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my work, about Dad's business challenges, about Isabella's art? You share your accomplishments, but you don't seem interested in our lives." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was accurate. I'd been so focused on proving my success to my family that I'd stopped treating them like people with their own interesting lives and challenges. "I do care about your lives," I said weakly. "Then why does every conversation become about your work?" Dad asked. "Why do you act like what we do here doesn't matter as much as what you do in Denver?" "I don't." "You do," Isabella said quietly, speaking for the first time. "You love us, Rebecca, but you don't respect us. You think we're small-town people living small-town lives, and you've outgrown us." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I looked around the room at my family, really looked at them, and saw the hurt I'd been blind to. They weren't just missing me. They were feeling judged by me, diminished by my success, made to feel like their choices were somehow less valid than mine. "That's not how I feel," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't entirely true. "Then how do you feel?" Mom asked. "Because from where we sit, it looks like you've decided we're not worth your time anymore." The conversation spiraled from there, with years of accumulated resentment spilling out in accusations and defensive responses. I felt attacked and misunderstood. They felt abandoned and dismissed. By the time we were all too exhausted to continue, the damage was done. I went to bed that night knowing that something fundamental had broken in my family. The careful balance I'd tried to maintain between my professional ambitions and family loyalty had collapsed, leaving everyone feeling hurt and angry. But I also knew that beneath the harsh words and hurt feelings, there was truth that needed to be acknowledged. I had been treating my family like supporting characters in my own story, rather than people with their own complex lives and valid dreams. The question was whether it was too late to repair the damage, or if Christmas Day would bring the final confrontation that would force us all to choose between the family we'd been and the family we might still become. Christmas Day 2019 dawned with the kind of artificial normalcy that follows a family fight. Everyone was being overly polite, speaking in careful tones that avoided the emotional landmines we'd laid the night before. Mom had prepared her traditional Christmas breakfast spread, but the usual joy was replaced by the exhausting effort of pretending everything was fine. I came downstairs to find the family already gathered in the kitchen. Dad was reading the newspaper with unusual intensity, as if the sports scores required his complete attention. Michael was checking his phone, responding to what appeared to be urgent work emails despite it being Christmas morning. Isabella was sketching in her notebook, lost in her own world. Amanda was helping Mom arrange pastries on a serving platter, their quiet conversation stopping when I entered the room. "Good morning, sweetheart," Mom said with forced brightness. "I made your favorite coffee cake." "Thanks, Mom." I poured myself coffee and sat at the table, feeling like I was intruding on a scene that had been carefully choreographed to exclude me. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Michael looked up from his phone. "I have to go to the job site today," he announced. "We're having issues with the foundation pour, and I need to check on the crew." "On Christmas Day?" Mom asked, disappointed. "Construction doesn't stop for holidays, Mom. Dad knows that." Dad nodded without looking up from his paper. "Sometimes work has to come first. People depending on you don't care what day it is." The comment was clearly directed at me, a not-so-subtle reminder of my own career-related absences from family events. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. "I understand work obligations," I said carefully. "But Christmas is supposed to be about family." "Is it?" Dad finally looked at me. "Because I seem to remember you cutting short your last visit because of some urgent story deadline." "That was different. There was a court ruling that—" "It's always different when it's your work," Michael interrupted. "Your deadlines are always more important than our family time." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel the conversation spiraling toward another confrontation, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from responding. "That's not fair. I've made sacrifices to be here." I turned down assignments, rearranged my schedule. "You turned down assignments?" Isabella looked up from her sketch. "Or you just didn't take on new ones?" "What's the difference?" "The difference is that you're acting like being here is a favor you're doing for us, rather than something you want to do." Her words hit like a slap. I stared at my sister, surprised by the directness of her criticism. Isabella had always been the family peacemaker, the one who avoided conflict and tried to smooth over disagreements. "I do want to be here," I said quietly. "You're my family." "But are we your priority?" Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because sometimes it feels like we're just something you fit in around the edges of your real life." The pain in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about hurt that had been building for years. I looked around the table at my family and saw the accumulated weight of small disappointments, missed calls, shortened visits, and divided attention. "I'm trying to build something important," I said, knowing even as I spoke that it was the wrong thing to say. "And we're not important?" Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," Michael said, standing up from the table. "You think what you do in Denver matters more than what we do here. You think your investigative reporting is more valuable than Dad's business? More meaningful than Isabella's art? More significant than the life Amanda and I are building together." "I don't think that." "You do," Amanda said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to me during the confrontation, and her voice carried a sadness that surprised me. "You've never once asked about my work. You've never shown interest in our wedding plans beyond the bare minimum. You've never asked Isabella about her art or your father about his business challenges. You talk about your stories, your awards, your career opportunities, but you don't seem curious about our lives." The accuracy of her observation was devastating. I realized that my family interactions had become performative, focused on sharing my accomplishments rather than genuinely connecting with their experiences. I care about your lives, I said weakly. Caring and being interested are different things, Isabella said. You care about us the way you care about the subjects of your stories. You want good things for us, but you don't want to be deeply involved in our day-to-day reality. The comparison to my journalistic work was particularly cutting because it was accurate. I'd learned to care about my story subjects while maintaining professional distance. Somehow, I'd started treating my family the same way, caring about their well-being while keeping myself emotionally removed from their experiences. That's not true, I protested, but my voice lacked conviction. When was the last time you asked about my gallery struggles? Isabella pressed. When did you last inquire about Dad's competition from the big construction companies? When did you show interest in Michael's challenges with managing crews or Amanda's career goals? I opened my mouth to respond but realized I couldn't. The questions exposed the one-sided nature of our recent interactions. I'd been so focused on proving my success to my family that I'd stopped treating them like people with their own interesting, complex lives. I thought you weren't interested in hearing about my work, I said lamely. We're not interested in hearing about your work when it's the only thing you talk about, Dad said. But we are interested in you as a person. We're interested in your relationships, your struggles, your doubts, your dreams beyond career advancement. You never ask about those things. Because you never share them, Mom said. You present yourself as this successful professional who has everything figured out. You don't let us see the parts of you that might need support or connection. The observation hit me like a physical blow. I realized that in my effort to prove I didn't need my family's approval, I'd stopped letting them see the parts of me that actually did need their love and support. I was trying to make you proud, I said, feeling tears threaten for the first time during the confrontation. We are proud of you, Mom said, her own eyes filling with tears. But we miss you. We miss the Rebecca who used to share her feelings, who used to ask for advice, who used to act like she valued our opinions. I do value your opinions. No, you don't, Michael said flatly. You've made it clear that you think you've outgrown us. You've made it clear that our small-town lives and conventional choices are beneath the sophisticated life you've built in Denver. I never said that. You didn't have to say it. It's in the way you talk about your work, the way you dismiss our concerns, the way you act like you're visiting from a more important world. The accusation stung because it contained truth I'd been avoiding. I had started to see my family's choices as limiting, their concerns as provincial, their lives as smaller than mine. I'd convinced myself that this was intellectual growth. But it was actually arrogance, disguised as sophistication. I'm sorry, I said, but the words felt inadequate for the hurt I'd caused. Sorry doesn't fix years of feeling like we're not good enough for you, Dad said. Sorry doesn't make up for all the times you've made us feel judged and found wanting. What do you want from me? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. We want you to decide what matters to you, Mom said. Because you can't keep straddling both worlds. You can't keep treating us like a backup plan for when your real life isn't demanding enough attention. You're not a backup plan. Then prove it, Michael said. Stop talking about how much you love us and start showing it. Stop treating family time like an obligation and start treating it like a priority. I don't know how to do that without giving up everything I've worked for. Maybe that's the problem, Isabella said quietly. Maybe you've set up your life in a way that makes family connection impossible. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I looked around the table at my family and saw the faces of people who were tired of feeling like they didn't matter to someone they loved. They weren't asking me to give up my career, but they were asking me to stop using it as a shield against genuine intimacy. I need some air, I said, standing up from the table. Running away again? Dad asked. I'm not running away. I'm trying to process what you've said. Process it somewhere else, Michael said, his voice hard. Because, frankly, I'm tired of watching you figure out how to care about us, like we're some kind of problem to be solved. I left the kitchen feeling like I'd been emotionally eviscerated. The worst part was that everything they'd said was true. I had been treating my family like supporting characters in my own story. I had been using my career success as a way to avoid the vulnerable intimacy that real relationships required. I walked through the neighborhood where I'd grown up, past houses decorated with Christmas lights and filled with families enjoying the holiday together. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years trying to prove I was worthy of my family's love, only to discover that my efforts had convinced them I didn't think they were worthy of mine. When I returned to the house 2 hours later, I found my family in the living room, sitting in a circle like they were having a meeting. The conversation stopped when I entered, and the silence was deafening. "We've been talking," Dad said without preamble, "and we've decided that maybe it's time for some space." "What does that mean?" "It means we think you need to figure out what you really want," Mom said, her voice steady but sad. "Because this pattern isn't working for any of us." "We're not cutting you off," Michael clarified. "But we're not going to keep pretending that these brief, superficial visits are enough. Either you want to be part of this family in a meaningful way, or you don't. But we're done being treated like we're lucky to get whatever scraps of attention you can spare." "So what are you saying?" "We're saying that until you can figure out how to be present when you're here, maybe you shouldn't come," Isabella said. "It's too painful to keep hoping for connection and getting performance instead." The words hit me like a physical blow. My family was essentially banning me from future gatherings until I could learn to be the daughter and sister they needed me to be. "You're kicking me out?" "We're giving you space to decide what matters to you," Dad said. "If family is truly a priority, you'll figure out how to make it work. If it's not, at least we'll all stop pretending otherwise." I stared at my family, seeing the pain behind their determined faces. They were protecting themselves from further hurt by creating distance, just as I had done by moving to Denver. "I don't know how to be different," I admitted. "That's something you'll have to figure out," Mom said. "But you can't figure it out while you're here, going through the motions of family connection without actually connecting." As I packed my bags that afternoon, preparing to leave Phoenix a day early, I realized that my family had called my bluff. They'd forced me to confront the reality that my career success meant nothing if it came at the cost of genuine human connection. The flight back to Denver felt like a journey into exile. I'd spent years trying to prove I was worthy of my family's love, only to discover that they'd been waiting for me to prove they were worthy of mine. The question now was whether I could learn to be the person they needed me to be, or if I'd lost my family forever in pursuit of a life that suddenly felt hollow despite all its professional achievements. 11 months. That's how long I went without speaking to my family after Christmas 2019. 11 months of holidays celebrated alone, of achievements shared with no one who'd known me as a child, of a success that felt increasingly hollow without the people who'd shaped me to witness it. The silence wasn't complete. I'd see glimpses of their lives through social media posts that felt like looking through a window at a warm house while standing in the cold. Michael's construction company landed a major commercial contract. Isabella's gallery exhibition was featured in Phoenix magazine. Dad was interviewed by the local paper about sustainable building practices. Mom started a neighborhood book club that met weekly at their house. They were thriving without me, which was somehow both a relief and a devastating confirmation of my worst fears about my own dispensability. In Denver, I threw myself into work with an intensity that concerned even Marcus, my photographer friend who'd seen me through plenty of deadline crunches. "You're working yourself to death," he said one October evening as we wrapped up a story about water rights in the Colorado River Basin. "When's the last time you took a real day off?" "I don't need days off. I need to stay busy." "Rebecca, you've published more investigative pieces in the past 6 months than most reporters do in 2 years. You're running from something." He was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it. Work had become my sanctuary, the one place where I felt competent and valued. My relationship with David had ended quietly in February, when he'd pointed out that I seemed incapable of being present for anything that didn't involve a deadline. "You're a great reporter," he'd said during our breakup conversation, "but you're a lousy girlfriend because you treat every relationship like it's secondary to your career." The criticism stung because it echoed what my family had been trying to tell me for years. I was excellent at caring about people in the abstract, the subjects of my stories, the victims of injustice, the communities affected by policy decisions. But I was terrible at the messy, demanding work of caring about specific people in my daily life. By November 2020, I'd won 3 more journalism awards and been promoted to senior investigative reporter. My salary had increased substantially, and I'd been approached by national publications about potential job opportunities. By any professional measure, I was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams. But success felt empty when you had no one to share it with who'd known you before you became successful. The turning point came on November 15th, when I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Amanda. I know you and your family aren't speaking, but I thought you should know that your mom is in the hospital. She's okay, but she had a mild heart attack. She's at Phoenix General if you want to call." I stared at the message for 10 minutes, my hands shaking. Mom was in the hospital, and I'd found out from my brother's fiancé rather than from my family. The realization of how completely I'd been cut off from their lives hit me like a physical blow. I called the hospital immediately, but when I asked to speak with Sofia Martinez, I was told that information could only be shared with immediate family members. When I explained that I was her daughter, there was a pause before the nurse said, "I'm sorry, but you're not on the approved contact list." That night, I sat in my Denver apartment, staring at my phone and wrestling with a decision that would define the rest of my life. I could call my family directly, break the silence, and face whatever consequences came from that conversation. Or I could respect their wishes for space and continue living my separate life. But the thought of my mother lying in a hospital bed, possibly wondering if I cared enough to reach out, made the decision for me. I called Isabella. "Rebecca?" Her voice was surprised but not hostile. "I heard about Mom. How is she?" "She's stable." It was mild, but it was scary. Dad found her collapsed in the kitchen yesterday morning. "Is she going to be okay?" "The doctors think so. She needs to make some lifestyle changes, reduce stress, but she should recover completely." Would it be okay if I came to see her?" A long pause. "I don't know, Rebecca. Things are still pretty raw." "I know. I'm not asking to fix everything. I just want to see her, to let her know I care." "Let me talk to Dad and Michael. I'll call you back." The call never came. Instead, I received a text from Michael 2 hours later. "Mom is fine. She doesn't need the stress of a dramatic reconciliation right now. Please respect that." The message was like a door slamming in my face. I'd been so effectively shut out of my family's life that I wasn't even allowed to visit my mother in the hospital. The isolation was complete. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If I couldn't be present for my family in person, I would find another way to show them that they mattered to me. I would send them Christmas gifts that demonstrated not just that I remembered them, but that I truly saw them as individuals with their own dreams, struggles, and worth. I spent the next month researching and planning with the same intensity I brought to my investigative work. This wouldn't be a gesture of guilt or obligation. It would be a demonstration of understanding and love. For Dad, I'd discovered through careful research that his construction company was struggling with competition from larger firms. I found a business consultant who specialized in helping family-owned construction companies modernize their operations and expand their market reach. I paid for a full year of consulting services, something that would actually help him compete and grow. For Mom, I'd learned through social media that her book club had become a central part of her social life. I arranged for a professional interior designer to create a dedicated library space in their home, built-in bookshelves, comfortable reading chairs, proper lighting, and a small coffee station. It would be a space where she could host her book club meetings and pursue her own love of reading. For Isabella, I'd tracked down one of her artistic heroes, a renowned painter who lived in Santa Fe, and arranged for a private mentorship session. The artist had agreed to spend a weekend reviewing Isabella's work, providing feedback, and helping her develop her technique. It was the kind of opportunity that could genuinely advance her career. For Michael, I'd discovered that he'd been talking about taking the company in a more sustainable direction, incorporating green building practices. I arranged for him to attend a prestigious sustainable building conference in California, complete with workshops, networking opportunities, and meetings with potential clients interested in environmentally conscious construction. For Amanda, I'd learned that she'd been talking about advancing her career in dental hygiene, possibly specializing in pediatric care. I arranged for her to attend a specialized training program that would give her the credentials she needed to pursue that specialization. Each gift was expensive. Together, They cost more than I'd ever spent on anything except my education. But more importantly, each gift demonstrated that I'd been paying attention to their lives, their dreams, their challenges. These weren't generic presents from someone who was trying to buy forgiveness. They were specific, thoughtful gestures from someone who finally understood that love meant caring about other people's goals as much as your own. I wrote individual letters to accompany each gift, not asking for reconciliation or forgiveness, but simply explaining why I'd chosen each particular gift and expressing my genuine admiration for what each person was trying to accomplish. The gifts were scheduled to arrive on December 23rd, exactly 1 year after the confrontation that had torn our family apart. I had no idea if they would be received, returned, or simply ignored, but I'd finally learned the difference between trying to impress my family and trying to serve them. Christmas Eve 2020. I was in my apartment, working on a story about healthcare disparities in rural Colorado, when my phone rang. Isabella's name appeared on the screen. Rebecca? Her voice was different than it had been during our last conversation. Softer, more uncertain. Hi, Isabella. We got your gifts. I hope they're helpful. They're incredible. How did you know about the mentorship program I'd been wanting to apply for? I've been following your work. Your paintings have gotten so much more sophisticated over the past year. You've been following my work? I've been following all of your lives. I know that sounds creepy, but I wanted to understand what was important to you, what you were trying to achieve. Rebecca, Dad is crying. What? He's crying. The business consultant you hired spent 3 hours on the phone with him today, and she's coming out next week to do a full assessment. She said she's worked with companies like ours before and knows exactly how to help us compete with the bigger firms. I felt tears starting in my own eyes. I'm glad it's helpful. Mom called the interior designer, and they're coming out next week to start planning the library. She's been talking about having a proper space for her book club for months. I saw the photos from her meetings. She looked so happy. Michael is already registered for the Sustainable Building Conference. He's been researching green building practices for years, but he never thought he'd get the opportunity to really pursue it. And Amanda? She's already signed up for the pediatric dental hygiene program. She's been wanting to specialize for 2 years, but she didn't think she could afford the training. We were both crying now, the sound of our tears audible through the phone. Rebecca, these gifts, they're not just expensive, they're thoughtful. They show that you understand what matters to us. I've been a terrible sister, a terrible daughter. I've been so focused on proving my worth that I forgot to actually be worth something to the people I love. You want to know something? We framed your journalism awards. All of them. Dad has them hanging in his office. What? We've always been proud of you. We just wanted you to be proud of us too. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Isabella told me about her artistic struggles, her insecurities, her dreams of having her work recognized beyond Phoenix. I told her about my professional successes that felt hollow without family to share them with, about my failed relationships, about the loneliness of being successful but disconnected. When we finally hung up, my phone immediately rang again. This time it was Mom. Rebecca, sweetheart, I've been wanting to call you for months. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry too. We handled things badly. We were hurt, and we wanted to hurt you back. You had every right to be hurt. I was selfish and self-centered. You were trying to build something important. We just wanted to be part of it. You are part of it. You're the most important part. Dad got on the phone next, his voice gruff with emotion. The business consultant says she can help us increase our revenue by 30% in the next 2 years. She understands our challenges. I'm glad, Dad. I want your business to succeed. I want your career to succeed too. I always have. I just wanted you to want our success too. Michael was the last to call, his voice careful but warm. Thank you for the conference registration. And thank you for thinking about Amanda. She's been part of our family for 3 years, but this is the first time you've treated her like she matters. She does matter. You all matter. We know that now. The question is, do you want to come home for Christmas? It won't be the same as before. We all have some healing to do. But we'd like to try again. I booked a flight that night, arriving in Phoenix on Christmas morning. The house looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. Instead of the artificial politeness of previous visits, there was genuine warmth. Instead of careful conversations that avoided real topics, we talked about everything: their dreams, my struggles, the mistakes we'd all made, the love that had survived despite everything. Christmas dinner was the first meal we'd shared as a family where I asked more questions than I answered. I learned about Dad's vision for sustainable construction, Mom's secret poetry writing, Isabella's plans for expanding her art into sculpture, Michael's ideas for employee profit sharing, Amanda's dreams of opening a pediatric dental practice. As we sat around the table, I realized that the gifts I'd sent had been more than presents. They'd been proof that I finally understood what love looked like. Not the performance of love, not the obligation of love, but the active, daily choice to care about other people's dreams as much as your own. Next year, Mom said as we were clearing the table, I want you to come home for Thanksgiving too, and Easter, and just because you want to see us. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. The flight back to Denver after New Year's felt different than any trip I'd taken before. I wasn't running towards something or away from something. I was simply returning to my life, carrying my family with me in a way I never had before. My work continued to be important to me, but it was no longer the only thing that defined me. I started calling home weekly again, but this time I spent more time listening than talking. I planned regular visits that weren't centered around holidays or obligations, but around genuine desire to be present in my family's lives. The journalism awards kept coming, but they felt different now. Not like validation of my worth, but like recognition of work I was proud to share with people who knew me before I became successful. This Christmas, I'm planning to spend 3 weeks in Phoenix, not because I have to, but because I want to. I'm bringing Marcus with me. He's excited to meet the family I've talked about so much. David and I reconnected 6 months ago, and he's commented on how much more present I am in our relationship. You're the same person, he said recently, but you're not afraid of connection anymore. He's right. The gifts I sent my family last Christmas weren't really about them. They were about me learning to love without armor, to care without conditions, to be present without performance. Family isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about caring enough to see other people clearly, to understand their dreams, to support their goals, even when they're different from your own. The gifts that changed everything weren't the expensive gestures I'd sent from Denver. They were the years of attention, understanding, and genuine care that those gifts represented. They were proof that love isn't about what you achieve for yourself. It's about how you choose to show up for the people who matter most. Sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones you publish. Sometimes they're the ones you live. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.